Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. My name is Mr. Dogboat333, and welcome back to HoI 4, TNO, the last days of Europe, possibly the last days of Guangdong. In the last video, we were doing okay getting out of the oil crisis, but Hitachi's threatened to pull out of our country outright, and that did not go over well for Chinese population. Now they're hostages, and it's all kind of not going too hot, I'll be honest. Captain HoI could do little but stare at the carnage that was about to unfold. He could see his men growing restless in front of him, and he felt his own trigger finger become steadily itchier too. After all, nobody knew who the hostages were yet, and he had a cousin that worked for Hitachi. But orders were orders. They were to hold the perimeter. Form the cage for the lion. As the police idled around the factory walls, a growing number of Hitachi trucks and men grew closer to the gates, kitted more as if they were fighting Manchurian partisans and a bunch of rowdy factory workers. Officially, negotiations were ongoing. The Hitachi men would scream into their microphones the hostages were to be released, and they were to surrender immediately. This would invariably result in shouts of, "Go to hell, you Manchu bastards," or something else to that result. As this went on, other Hitachi men lined outside the entrances, submachine guns in hand. One final warning was given and was rebuffed, as all the others were. This is going to get bloody. What if hostages were killed, not by the workers, but by Hitachi bullets? The police had already offered their supply of tear gas and less than lethal rounds, but the private security men had just laughed. They were probably in for the slaughter. As the door fell down and the automatic rattle commenced, HoI made a decision. They couldn't just hold the perimeter if his hostages were to make it out alive. Men, prepare to follow. The shop floor had quickly become a grisly assemblage of machine and viscera. After the shooting had started, there was little further need for hostages. If they were not getting out alive, thought Feng, she would be damned if Hitachi managed to salvage anything. Neither their men nor their machines would break anyone's bodies or spirits ever again. Feng's hated ex-manager was stuck inside a lathe, hollowed out like a pumpkin. Another body laid folded into the recess at the end of a conveyor belt, spilling gray matter into the circuitry. Try cleaning that up, you bastards. Of course, they were not the only bodies on the floor. The Hitachi men had guns, and the workers did not. Some fought, others ran, others stayed put, staring with the same defiance and silent contempt. But the outcomes were all the same. Feng had managed to blindside one of them with a crowbar, downing him, but had quickly been rewarded with a bullet to the side for her trouble. As the pain shot through her and she fell to the floor, she had the good sense to dive into an adjoining room and then play dead. Luckily, it wouldn't matter. She had no idea if it hit anything vital, and even if it hadn't, she expected to get shot again soon. Well, she thought, couldn't quite call it a good life, but at least I had my pride at the end of it. She waited for the end to come. Only it was not coming. The Hitachi men were not moving forward. Instead, they were arguing with some unknown force outside. Feng could not understand the muffled Japanese, and so risked a peek through the door. The police had entered the factory for some reason, and now they and the Hitachi forces looked ready to punch one another. She moved slowly, painfully towards a window out opposite the door. The perimeter wasn't there anymore. Maybe this wasn't the end. As she prepared to climb through, she thought of it all those who had fallen. Her friend Lin, riddled with bullets. Miao Nian sat against the wall, holding hands above a pool of blood. All gone, but Feng wasn't. Not yet. Your deaths will not be in vain. Only have a little bit of stability, I notice. Citizens of a Hengli residential facility. You're interfering in a police action. If you continue to deny law enforcement entry to the premises, you will all be held collectively responsible for harboring a known fugitive. Beyond the row of police shields stood Hitachi security, branding their guns menacingly, but not firing them. This was met once again with a volley of shouts and rocks towards GPF lines. Some out of windows, others by those behind the line blocking the gate. Arms were linked, face morphed into perfect images of hate. Suspect Swang Feng is connected to the murder of 24 unarmed hostages in the loudspeaker was cut out by enormous cheer. 24 more! 24 more, came the call. How many Chinese had to die for your money? Go back across the sea and take your lapdog with you. This is your final warning before... Before what, you Manchu dogs? We beat you 6 years ago, and we're happy to beat you again now. A steel trash can fell from a top-floor apartment building, sending 2 of the front officers to the charge, breaking the shield line. Then the mob at the gates charged. The Tachi fire team lifted their guns, but were unable to make a clear shot between the ranks of police and protester. Batons collided against bricks, fists, and broken bottles, swung haphazardly without any care for personal safety. The GPF attempted to seal itself and break through, but with every passing moment, more and more Chinese ran out of the building to join the melee. Eventually, bruised and bloodied, the police commissioner sounded retreat. He can't take on all of us. Oh, fuck. It's funny, because we roughly have broad Chinese support. All units, be advised, disturbances have been reported in your vicinity. Exercise extreme caution. Dispatch, requesting immediate backup along Taiyun Avenue. Patrol vehicles are being blocked and chased by rocks. Medical... Please hold, officer. Our lines are experiencing heavy load and system malfunctions. Your request may have to take some time. Demonstrations have spread to Hong Kong. I repeat, demonstrations have spread to Hong Kong. That's a negative. We cannot spare any cars at present. You need to handle all this with what you... All remaining units in the area are advised to pull out. I repeat, pull out and regroup at the central precinct. All non-priority areas are to be... Request for military support has been denied. Tensions along the board. Hold what you can. Wait for the situation to de-escalate. We can't hold much longer. In Koshu, the crowds have assembled since before the dawn, their barrage of slogans and chants emanating up from the streets and alleys in front of the government complex. It seemed the entire city had turned out their anger, a teeming mass of men and women crammed shoulder to shoulder against a thin line of police at the gates. Chief Executive, you have to stay away from the window. It's not safe. Nowhere is safe. Chief Executive Matsushita Masaharu snapped barely. The mobs that had risen across Guangdong were well and truly out of control, turning the headache of the Hitachi factory hostage crisis into a raging inferno, threatening to swallow Guangdong whole. The previous night, Matsushita Masaharu and the rest of the tycoons had listened in horror as the police frantically reported being pushed back to key facilities, and the Japanese districts in the larger cities are breaking into full retreats on the countryside. The Zujin businessmen and the Legislative Council were ducking his calls, saying little beyond the government's latest promises weren't enough. All the while, Japanese investors turned their eyes on the chief executive, equally angry at and secretly enjoying his plight, safely barricaded behind police cordons outside their walled settlements. Sorry. Matsushita Masaharu replied to an officer, shaking the cobwebs from his mind while throwing on a well-creased jacket. Call everyone to a meeting. We need a new response. All the while, Guangdong burned. The simmering anger and desperation of the people, once ignited, is nearly impossible to pull out. The Guangdong riots have begun. The task Guangdong evolves to the Guangdong riots. The region of Guangdong have been updated, where the amount of government control is determined by the amount of control the police has. However, the rioters still automatically seize control of 3 rural regions. Japanese frustration is based on the amount of Japanese approval we have. Due to the Guangdong riots and perceived instability, the Chinese and Japanese consulates cannot hold meetings with us unless the topic is directly affiliated with the riots. The inner world is irrelevant in the face of it. Guangdong riots. Okay. The oil crisis continues to destabilize global society, claiming its latest victim, the stability of a autocratic state of Guangdong in southern China. In the aftermath of massive economic turmoil brought about as part of a global descent into chaos, the anger that has long built up in its ethnically segregated society has finally exploded into violent anti-Japanese, anti-corporation protests. Martial law has been declared though so far has not prevented a near total breakdown of order in many cities. The chief executive has released a communique indicating its intent to maintain order. It will not be clear, is not clear how successful, if at all, he will be. Between the Chinese mainland and South China Sea lies Guangdong, an artificial state with an artificial culture and identity. And from that, the fires of wrath have been birthed in the Guangdong riots. In this hotspot of Chinese-Japanese culture lies rage and hatred stemming from the main ethnic groups. The Chinese, organized under the Committee of Chinese Labor, the Zujin, united in the Guangdong Federation of Tradesmen, and the Japanese, standing loyal to the chief executive, when each state have their own level of approval for our government. Each of these ethnic groups represent the Cantonese societal ladder, and the support or lack thereof can make or break the finances and stability of Guangdong. The underworld of Guangdong lies supplanted by the rioters and government, where rioter control leads to a sowing dissent and instability, strengthening and radicalizing the CCL and GFT, with the government doing their best to stem the tide of wrath and hatred. Well, shit. The good news is that our economy is looking good. The riots are widespread. The dissenters are furious. We have 15% of control. It would seem that Japanese frustrations remain minimal, which is nice. Shit, there's a whole new thing. 2 decades of oppression, boiling ethnic tensions, a society built on the exploitation of the weak. These are the things that the rioters have been facing in the state of Guangdong and what they are demanding then. In their attempt to destroy the Pan-Asian corporate experiment, the Chinese have organized under the Committee of Chinese Labor, while the Zujin stand under the Guangdong Federation of Tradesmen. The severity of their actions depend on both strength and radicalism. Or if these Jews spiral out of control, who knows what will happen to the state. If the chief executive of the state of Guangdong, he must subjugate these 2 groups either by force or by negotiation. To do either, the state must take sufficient measures to curb the group's strength and radicalism. Yet time is a more limited resource, as the Legco grows ever more desperate and irrational. The Japanese grow ever more frustrated, as long as the streets of Guangdong are ablaze. Fuck. Well, we have a majority, in theory, to force through whatever we need, just by ourselves. If it would ever just work perfectly like that, which it probably won't. Shattered illusion. And we may never put back the pieces. Now, at this moment of time, one can be forgiven for thinking that Matsushita's actions have finally brought peace to Guangdong. But the truth cannot be further from that. His solution was only momentary. Now, workers and laborers have taken to the streets in the wake of Hitachi's disastrous mishandling of its factories in Koshu. Tens of thousands roam the streets of Guangdong in protest of recent events. The illusion of peace in Guangdong is shattered, perhaps for good. This is our time to regroup and reorganize our forces to respond to this threat. True, this is going to be a monumental task. The country has never seen protests of this scale before. It will take a lot of resources and commitment from the state to bring back the masses back to heel. But we must push on for Guangdong and the co-prosperity sphere. We're not willing to negotiate, and we don't, okay. We could negotiate with them. Our despair is 15. Radicalism, savage riots are widespread. Okay. So discreet. Okay, so discreet. We'll fund some action against the GFT. We'll do some general funding. Man. Shit. Oh! At least Germany's going through the same thing we are. Time for choosing is at hand indeed. One people we will be. Will we be? A band of brothers. No danger, no distress shall sunder us. And we'll be freemen as our fathers were, and sooner welcome death than live as slaves. Friedrich Schiller, William Tell. Freedom beckons. Quiet! The chief executive slammed his fist on the table. The room quickly hushed. Matsushita's always been stressed, but for him to burst into anger like this was unheard of. Tsushita, the police need to begin combing Koshu for protesters and apprehending them. The Kenpai will be sent to assist your force. But, sir, I said do it! At this point, everyone in the rooms averted Matsushita's eyes. They could only watch as the chief executive ranted and raved over the protests. Do you know how much I've done to get where I am? How much I've sacrificed? I've had to claw and break my way through every decision I've ever made, and not once have I ever gotten the chance to reap the fruit of my labor. Now that I finally have what I want, these bastards try to oppose me and take it away. How dare they? Damn it, I need a drink! Matsushita stormed back into his office, took out his bottle of sake, began drinking it slowly. He planned to finish it, even if it meant dealing with the protesters drunk. Before he took another swig, he called Tsushita back in to discuss the protest. I have another job for the police. Make sure the Kenpai keep the violence at a rational level. You know how intense and barbaric they can get in the heat of the moment, and their loyalty is to Japan, not to me. Understand? The police chief nodded his head and quickly left the office. With that, Matsushita fulfilled his plan by the end of the day. The chief executive is at his wit's end. Well, let's pick up the pieces. For every day that we take no action, 100 more laborers take to the streets of Guangdong and protest, further escalating the already grave situation. If left unchecked, their numbers will grow uncontrollably. With enough time, Guangdong may be overrun by protesters, causing anarchy to descend upon the Three Pearls. We cannot allow these territories and ingrates to rule the streets for long. Something must be done to clamp down upon this movement. There's no time to waste, no second for us to spare. These riots will end, and the police force will make sure they do. We have no choice but to stop this before the situation worsens. I want to be careful with the activism. Oh. I think Imperial State is pulling something out, it seems. Just gonna gather our strength. Of course, charging aimlessly without proper preparation into crowds of rioters is at best foolhardy. Before we strike them, we must first make sure that we hit each and every strike. We make each and every strike hit and hurt. At this point, our police force is in disarray and in panic due to the situation unfolding so rapidly. And at this shape, we stand no chance against the rioters in the streets. We must take decisive action, but not without watching our steps. We consolidate all of our strength into a coherent and organized force, planning and preparing the necessary steps to counter the people on the streets. When we are ready, we will strike hard and fast. Hopefully our efforts will pay off. Smoke was still filling his nostrils by the time the street had finally cleared. The rally scattered and protesters arrested by the dozen. The sergeant daintily stepped over crushed picket signs and spent tear gas grenades, that littered to the ground as he stared at his clipboard. 35 men, 12 women, larger than his precinct was used to. Some of his subordinates were quick to remind him of, "Sir, what are we supposed to do with them?" A stocky young man in short sleeves and gestured the line of men and women, all handcuffed and kneeling on the ground. Some had bruises and a black eye or two, and all thoroughly cowed for their part in stirring up the trouble. Wearily, the sergeant bit at his cigarette before angrily stamping it out beneath his heel. "Just round him up and bring him in. Why haven't we already?" "We have no room," the young cadet insisted, gesturing to the 2 police vans at the end of the street, both enough room for 8, maybe 9 or 10. The sergeant knew and could have not have cared less. The riots were only getting worse, and needed every man on call to keep the protesters on their toes. "Bring them in." "But, sir?" "Bring them in! Pack them together! Stack them like cordwood if you have to, but bring them in!" The protesters' eyes lit up like neon signs as the policemen pulled them up by the elbows. It was only a 20-minute drive to the precinct, and wasn't as if they were going to suffocate on the way. Or at least that's what the sergeant told himself, as he cruelly kicked the empty aid canister at the protesters, were rounded up and stuffed in the back police van, like shipments to a factory. General decrease in everything. We'll take that. Japan is observing the crisis. We could break the budget freeze. Shit, yeah, the budget's frozen, isn't it? Well, let's try luring them out. It'll decrease their strength, at least. Though they are a large, unwieldy group, the rioters still have something resembling an organization and make use of minimal but effective tactics. Unsing Force said they think they cannot fight, they retreat to areas of cities where the streets are narrow and the architecture obstructs our passage, and continues their disruption from there. Given the layout of the major cities within Guangdong, particularly Koshu itself, this means that they can avoid us easily. To effectively reduce their strength, we must first be able to fight them. The riot control forces will be make use of methods that can lure them out into areas where they can be more easily combated. In a matter of time, they'll have nowhere to run but into our embrace. Do that. Looks like we can do that too. We could address the Legislative Council. I think the riots are widespread, but they're not too bad quite yet. Honestly, it could be a lot worse. I'm knocking on wood because I realize you should never fucking say that. Okay, lure them out. I'll try striking when the iron is hot. There's no time for us to be patient and slowly chip away the rioters' strength without achieving anything. We previously showed restraint in combating the rioters. This time we will not. The best method of ending crisis is strike once, but strike as hard as we can. The action will ensure a rapid return to normalcy on the streets and the return of order to the country. Everything we have, every man, every armored vehicle, and every equipment we have in our stockpile will be unleashed in one devastating blow of the rioters. They will fall and Guangdong will return to the norm. And they'll go back to the factories whether they want to or not. Right? Sentries are furious. Streets of Rage. What do we got? Some options here. Fairly high support here. Try moving to Momai. To Officer Lamb, the atmosphere now felt uncomfortably familiar, oddly reminiscent of the chaos which erupted in the aftermath of the Pseudo Crisis. Crowds of people smothered in the streets, abuse regularly hurled out from them. He never minded after, although he had a point. The whole thing felt far too unsettling to think so much time had passed, and the only thing that had changed was how angry the people were. Suddenly the mob flared, charged for Lamb, but he did not flinch. The formation around him had tightened and absorbed the shock of the wave, and soon it was their turn to descend on the people. Officer Lamb grabbed the first man into his grasp, whoever he was, squirming immensely, but Lamb's expertise gave him the upper hand as he quickly subdued the rider and hauled him back. But something happened. There was a large pull against his own, as worst of all, its heart started stopping sound. It was a scream. Hey! 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 We! It did not stop. It was clear to Lamb that the two were close, likely brothers. He could barely take the strain on his heart now. He strangled any fleeting sympathy and clung on, waiting for his fellow officers to come to his aid. But before the brother could be caught, the crowd had swallowed him back. He could still hear the cries as the man was held back, and he hurled HoI back into the back of the van. And as he lay tossing and turning the whole night. The next day, Lamb returned to his duties. Shit. The more he lacked success, the more desperate Yamauchi got, the more wild his imagination ran. He needed to be bolder. That was what he thought. He learned from the last failure. Everyone would like vacuum cleaners, but what did they need? Transportation. Everyone needed to get around the city. Taxis, that was it. Glorious revelation burst into his brain like fireworks. Saw Yamauchi running back to his desk, making call after call to suppliers, experts, friends he could trust not to run away with this million-yen idea. And after weeks of frantic planning, amidst a backdrop of growing tensions he barely noticed, Yamauchi finally had something to implement. He made one last call to a lucky supplier and informed them that he would send a purchase order on the following day. By the end of next week, he would have a fleet of 20 cars painted friendly yellow, and tomorrow he would start interviewing drivers. Nintendo would boldly enter the taxi business, servicing neighborhoods often forgotten by other providers. It would work. It would have to work. Or else. Yamauchi heard shattering glass to his side. His head snapped up from the window of pile papers that would hold up his future. It wasn't his window, thankfully, but he suddenly became aware of a loud commotion. Peering through the window, he saw a small group of protesters against a police barricade, chanting out slogans, boldly picking a fight with the cops. At first, he thought it was a meaningless distraction. He slammed up the window before turning to his desk. But as he looked upon his plan, he realized that the niche Nintendo taxis needed a safe journey from start to finish. Not to self, ask drivers if they have military or law enforcement experience. There have been few things more frightening than facing parents that you had failed. It's one thing for him to risk all this movement, no matter how much he believed in it, but it was another to involve his brother. Returning home to tell his parents that their son was arrested because of his insistence that he join was difficult. Chun didn't think he'd ever see his parents so distraught before, because then they at least had each other. Now one of them was gone, if only for a time. Mother almost collapsed to the ground, instead sinking onto the kitchen chair. She said nothing, but just began crying as Leong pulled her into a tight embrace. His father's face was still, his eyes distant. He'd likely known what had happened the moment Chun walked in the house alone. The fear that gripped the small home was oppressive, familiar, and heavier than it ever had been. The fear was that they weren't going to see HoI again, that their son was lost in the depths of a state forever. He did not know what else to say and simply joined his parents in an embrace. His mother cried into her husband's shoulder. Promise me. Promise me you will not leave. Stay here until it ends. It's too dangerous now. Shun wished he could answer honestly. He wished he could promise without reservation that he would not risk them losing a second son. Yet he couldn't rest and just let the state that had taken his brother be left untouched. They wanted him to do that. They wanted this to break him. Instead, it had only solidified his resolve. He would see this tyrannical state torn apart, no matter what it took. I promise. My officers have failed to bring an end to the riot, Chief Executive Matsushita. Not only that, from what people have told me, they have completely failed to address any of the issues that we needed to prevent the riot. I'm sorry I was not able to help you. The Chief Executive wiped his forehead, and the office was hot, cramped, sweaty. His suit clung to him like a vice. Keep going. Most of the resources in each station have also been depleted, and unsettling news has come to light. Mobs, they captured some of our armaments. My apologies, Chief Executive. There was nothing for it, Commissioner. The blame is not on you, but it appears we will have to pursue a new strategy. Go out there and talk to your men, Commissioner. Tell them they'll not rest until the mobs have been crushed. We'll fund police efforts. Matsushita returned once more to the room with the Merchant Council, the only place in the whole of Guangdong where the cacophony of the riots could not be heard. Seated away behind the safety of reinforced doors and layers upon layers of bodyguards, the Chief Executive was anxious to reassert himself in the face of the failure the police had faced. Yeah, that was much easier said than done. Something that he had not fully come to grips with. Once he arrived, he let the Chief of Police explain himself first. Despite the scale of the damage caused by the rioters, the police force remains relatively strong by comparison, sir. Protect the majority of the corporation's assets, especially with the help of each of their security teams for a while longer. On the face of it, this news seemed reassuring to many, but the Chief Executive was not satisfied. What Matsushita knew was the longer the people were on the streets and on the factories, the farther his opponents of the Legislative Council would move against his aims. Hesitancy was not something they should accept and something he could not tolerate. That's not what I came to hear. Not in the slightest. We cannot simply sit by and wait for them to burn out on their own. No one can tell how much damage their blaze would have wrought by then. Actions need to be taken now. The room was warningly silent. Once he stopped, Barlow muttering between Ibuka and his associate, with no support coming, Matsushita quieted himself down. From that point onward, the other members of council took control, split between those who favored continued containment of the rioters and those who wanted an approach focusing on combating radicalization. Debate turned into argument, and soon it all spilled over into thinly veiled abuse, even as Matsushita waited for it all to end. An ambition on the edge, and country on the brink of disaster. You must revise our plans to deal with the Guangdong riots. Shit. Only fools would insist blindly on staying on a mistaken course, but fewer still of those who would know the correct path forward. We have seemed to miscalculate our moves, and we have done nothing but make the situation worse. I suppose the strategy of striking when the iron is hot has failed, and the heavy crackdown has only strengthened their resolve to the workers, and in turn, radicalized their motives. This is bad. Really bad. It's now up in the air, especially up to Matsushita to show us the way forward. A new tactic towards the situation will have to be adopted. At the moment, we have two options to choose from. The first option is to continue what we were doing and grind the riders to submission with our superior strength. The alternative approach is to attempt to open talks with riders to reconcile and cease hostility. Our choice will determine how the situation unfolds. Oh, hey, another tabby focus icon. To out of harm's way. The key to containing the riots is to establish a fire break and keep the wider public from joining the conflagration. Right? Out of harm's way. We have chosen to approach the rioters with a reconciling manner, and we must waste no time in getting to work to bring back order to the streets. Our focus is to radicalize the troublemakers on the streets to the point that they may be drastically easier to handle and control, at least until a permanent, peaceful solution to the crisis can be found. Sometimes we have to know to concede to some of their demands. This will surely calm the rioters down, but we must practice caution, as the integrity of a state cannot be compromised only to pacify some rash workers causing troubles on the streets. You may give concessions, but not too much. Every morning brought a new task to the new residents of the Zhujiang Park. A gaggle of volunteers prepared soup on portable gas stoves in the park. Corner of the park covered in an impromptu field kitchen. Making sure to keep enough distance from each other to minimize the risk of fire. Night patrols filed back in, one group at a time, to hand over their duties to the morning shift. Though the police had vacated this corner of a mine nearly 2 weeks ago, they hadn't evacuated the city entirely. Until they did, the patrols would provide enough warning for more organized defense. Several men were carried in on stretchers, having suffered bruises or broken arms overnight. A few had simply taken a bad fall in the night, tripping over an unattended block of concrete or twisting an ankle while navigating a burnt-out protest barricade. Others had been involved in the nighttime melees with scars to prove it. Laundry, maintenance, sanitation, communications. The list would be endless, giving everyone in the district something to do. A few would gripe half-jokingly that their liberation is simply giving them more work to do, but was more meaningful than anything else they had done on behalf of their corporate masters. The taste of freedom. I'll decrease our GDP growth, but I think I'm not too worried about a GDP check at this point. After a while, it became impossible to ignore how no matter how hard one tried. Every street in Hong Kong had a poster on it. They were on the fronts of buildings, on gates, on telephone poles, on cars, on anything and everything that could possibly be covered by them. They were a white algae that coated the entire city in 4-word slogans. You couldn't close your eyes to avoid it, either. Those same slogans on posters were shouted at full volume at innumerable protests and marches that were on at seemingly every hour. If you were in tall buildings like Matsushita was, the whole noise was very much still audible. Then, there was a violence. Single day, the chief executive received lurid reports detailing clashes between police and protesters. It didn't take long before he realized that the riots were taking a serious toll on Guangdong. Their objective was to make their demands clear. He thought they'd done their job. Some time had passed since the riots began, enough to consider carefully whether it was worth responding to them or not. Certainly worth at least thinking about, the chief executive thought, since more than enough blood had been shed already. The riots were destabilizing Guangdong by the second, and if talking to the protesters could help bring an end to all this, well, then why not? On the other hand, negotiating and failing would be even worse. A broken promise would be even worse than making no promise at all. There's no telling how the LegCo, or worse still Japan, would react if word got out that they were talking to the radicals. Masahiro gave it some more thought. A difficult decision looms. Fuck. There's a lot of thought needs to be given to all this. And I'm going to have to give thought to it on my own. So I'm going to end the video here. Good night. Long live Guangdong. Just like we did, comment section below. Hit the sub button if you want to keep up to uploads, and check out various links down below. Thanks always for watching, gang, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.